Long, long ago, the Emperor of Japan was greeted one afternoon by an emissary of his court, a diplomat who had travelled far and wide, and on his journeys on behalf of the Emperor, he had picked up little gifts here and little gifts there for the Emperor's wives, for the Emperor's children, for all of the significant dignitaries of the court, and of course, for the Emperor himself. Now, you may imagine that being an emperor, he would be used to gifts of gold and of silver, of things encrusted with rubies and pearls and emeralds and diamonds and all manner of extravagances. And indeed, he was used to such gifts. But this particular diplomat was remarkably good at his job. He was a very insightful man who knew that the emperor at heart was, well, I hesitate to say a simple man, because no emperor is ever truly simple, but had he been born to a different station in life, he would certainly have been described as a simple man, a gentleman, a man of as humble a taste as any emperor is capable of having. And so when the diplomat selected a gift from China, which is where he'd been on his diplomatic mission, when he selected a gift to present to the Emperor of Japan, it was not made of rubies or of diamonds or of gold or of silver or of emeralds or of sapphires or of any manner of extravagances. It was a simple necklace composed of ornately carved wooden beads and polished up shells from the beach. Beautiful, unusual shells, but shells nonetheless. And the centre of the necklace was a simple piece of carved soapstone in the shape of a Shisa. And a Shisa, should you be wondering, is a magical dog. Now, most homes, most temples, many buildings, important public buildings throughout Japan, and indeed China itself, have Shisa guarding them. One to the left and one to the right of the door. And the Shisa to the left has its mouth closed, and the Shisa to the right has its mouth open. And it is alleged by some that the Shisa with its mouth closed is male, with its mouth closed is female, and the Shisa with its mouth open is male. And the job of the closed mouth Shisa is to keep all of the good things in the home, all of the benevolent spirits, the kindly energies, what we might in this day and age call the good vibrations, or at least we would have done if it was 1972. But the right hand Shisa, the one with the open mouth, it is his job to roar at forces of evil, to frighten them off, to chase off the monsters, the demonic forces, the goblins, the ghouls, the creatures of the night, the nasty, unpleasant things that creep around in the day as well, and seek to invade the home. And it had occurred to the diplomat when he was looking at the pendants that the artisan had made with the female Shisa and the ones with the male Shisa, that the emperor, obviously himself a male, but nonetheless, it was the emperor's job to chase away the hostile forces that threatened Japan. And so when he presented this simple little pendant to the emperor, who was a great dog lover himself, he had a dozen dogs on his attendants, he explained to the emperor that he saw him, the emperor, as being like the protective Shisa of Japan itself, frightening off the hostile forces and keeping them away, particularly the hostile forces just over the waters in China itself. And the emperor was much impressed by this, and he loved that pendant. He kept it literally close to his heart, for when on state occasions, when he wanted to be dressed in his finest, his fanciest, his blingiest, he still wore the pendant, but he tucked it inside his tunic, so it was against his skin, next to his heart. And when he was around the palace with his wives and children, enjoying life, not doing anything particularly state-worthy, he would wear it outside so that all could see it and admire his Shisa. Now, It was on an occasion when the Shisa was tucked away inside, for he was making imperial visits, going round the place kissing babies and opening supermarkets and beheading people, the usual things that emperors do, that he arrived in the coastal village of Mandanbashi. And he was shown around by the mayor of Mandanbashi and the Noro, the ancient priestess of Mandanbashi, so ancient she hobbled hunched up on a walking stick ever so slowly, looking for the world like a wrinkly old tortoise. Round the village they went, and they were shown all of the temples and the buildings of state and the places that people like to show off when there is a visiting dignitary. But the emperor couldn't help but notice here and there, particularly down near to where the harbour was, there were many shattered buildings. And it surprised him a little. He knew, obviously, that sometimes there would be terrible waves crashing onto the land, and sometimes there'd be great storms which would cause damage to buildings. But usually when he turned up on an imperial visit, the locals would do everything in their power, certainly the mayors would do everything in their power to tidy the place up, to have it looking pristine, even if normally it was anything but pristine. And he made some passing comment to the effect. And the mayor, heavy of heart, explained to him that it wasn't due to tidal waves, or at least not in the usual sense of the word, and it wasn't due to storms, at least not in the usual sense of the word, but rather out there at sea, several miles out, deep, deep, deep in the bottom of the ocean, there lived an enormous sea dragon. And every now and then, every month or two, it would swim inland and emerge out in the harbour itself, and the waters would splash and crash upon the shore, a little like a tidal wave, and it would claw its way onto land, ripping and tearing at the buildings, and breathing its great thunderous breath, a little like a storm. And it would gobble up anyone who couldn't run away fast enough. And it was a miracle that the Noro was still alive, because she could hardly run. Well, she couldn't run at all, she could barely even hobble. But certainly the dragon had gobbled up all of the elderly people in Mandanbashi. It gobbled up all of the ill, unwell people who shuffled about. It gobbled up most of the small children who couldn't run away fast enough. About the only people left in Mandanbashi were the fit and the healthy and the fast, the ones who could leg it away from the dragon before it lost interest and went back into the ocean. And they'd rebuilt the houses 2, 3, 4, 5 times in some cases, rebuilt them only for a few weeks or a few months later the dragon to come back in and rip and tear and smash, sweeping its great tail hither and yon, shattering everything in sight and eating people left, right and centre. Well, the emperor said this was a terrible thing, this was a dreadful thing. He had never heard the like of it before, how something so awful should happen. And he said, whilst he was on his visit, he was only there for the one day, whilst he was on his visit, he would give great thought to the matter of the sea dragon. And he would do so looking out to sea. And he noticed that down by the harbour itself there was a great flat stone. And so he went and he sat on the great flat stone. And he sat with his hand cradling his chin, thinking and looking out to sea, striking a pose. And really that was pretty much all he was doing, because, not that he would admit it to anyone at all, but he really had absolutely no idea whatsoever as to what could be done about this dragon. But if he had just admitted that to the people of Mandanbashi, his credibility would be in tatters. And so he had to look as if he were having deep philosophical thoughts, as if he were strategizing and planning and contemplating the fight with the dragon, like a chess master contemplating his next move on the board, even though he just sat there staring out to sea empty-headed. But he wanted to look the part. And he sent his viziers, he sent his guards back up into the town that they might eat and drink and rest, and put their feet up after the long journey, whilst he was sitting in deep thought. Of course, there were a few guards hovering not too far away, because you never know if there might be an assassination attempt, but the rest of them had gone off to do as they were told and take some well-earned rest. And the mayor and the ancient Noro, they too sat a good few yards away, discussing and muttering amongst each other as to what the emperor had said, what might he do, what could he do about this dragon. And whilst they were all sitting and thinking, the sea began to boil and bubble in the harbour. And the emperor stood up and looked at the water and thought to himself, because he wasn't the brightest emperor ever, thought to himself, what on earth could this be? Some sort of whirlpool staring itself up, or maybe a great shoal of fish coming into the harbour and flapping their fins and their tails about. And at that moment, as the water started roiling, the ancient Noro went off into a trance, and she began to see things in her mind's eye. For this is what Noros do. They have visions, they commune with the ancient gods, they see what lies in the land beyond, in the realm of the kami, in the realm of the spirits and the beings of the universe. And an image came strongly into her mind, and just as the image was coming into the old woman's mind, that bubbling water erupted in a great splatter, almost like a huge heavy rainstorm that fell down, partly in the harbour and partly on the town. And there, the enormous head on the great long neck of the dragon, roaring and thundering, its tail sweeping the waters up, whipping them into a tidal wave that smashed and crashed against the buildings on the bay and destroyed the many ships. Well, I say many ships, what was left of the ships in the harbour. It roared, it thundered, it clawed its way towards land, looking for someone to eat. And who should it see but the emperor, sat knees knocking upon the flat stone by the harbour. And he was quite a chubby little emperor, and he looked like a tasty little snack. Well, the guards that were closest, they jumped up, they drew their swords, they had their shields up, they rushed to defend their emperor, and the dragon leapt in and snapped them up one after another, and gulped them down as hors d'oeuvres. People screamed, they roared, they ran hither and yon. Guards came this way, viziers and courtiers came that way, bashing into each other, not knowing what on earth to do, for they'd never seen even a small dragon, let alone a dragon the size of this one, towering up, head towards the clouds, roaring and thundering and coming ever closer towards the emperor and anybody else it could find to eat. And the ancient Noro knew she had to impart her vision to the emperor. But, as I say, she was into her 90s. She was hobbling around near bent double on a stick. There was no way she could get down to the flat stone by the harbour in time. And so she summons Chiga, her great-grandson, and said to him, "Go and tell the emperor what I have seen. Run as fast as you can." And she quickly explained to him. And the boy legged it down towards the harbour, pushed aside the guards and the viziers that were falling and tripping over each other in their panic, rushed up to the emperor, tugged at the sleeve of his imperial robe, which was normally a very undiplomatic thing to do, but under the circumstances, and told him what his great-grandmother had said, that the emperor was wearing a Shisa, and he must take the Shisa out and wave it at the dragon. Well, the emperor wondered what on earth the little soapstone Shisa was meant to achieve against this gargantuan reptile. But what else could he do? He had no other options. So he delved underneath his silk robes, his ornate garb, his jewels and his gold and rubies and silver and emeralds and diamonds and all the things he was draped in. He ferreted under all of that and found that very simple soapstone Shisa pendant, and he held it up and shook it at the dragon, wondering what on earth would happen, expecting the dragon just to lean in and bite him in two. But it did not. For as the dragon was leaning in ready to bite him in two, the Shisa, that little soapstone carved dog with the open mouth, roared. Such a huge eardrum-splitting roar that the very air itself vibrated and shook. The buildings all shook as if there was an earthquake. Windows and glass bottles shattered hither and yon. The dragon reeled back, its ears bleeding from the shock of it, and a look of absolute horror and surprise upon the dragon's face, that this monstrously loud noise had come from seemingly nowhere. So loud, in fact, was the roar of the dog, that all the way up in the heavens, all the way up in Taka Amahari, where the gods dwell, the buildings of the gods shook. And a massive boulder that sat near the gates of Taka Amahara started to vibrate, and then it twisted a little this way, and then it twisted a little that way, and it twisted a little back, and it twisted forward, and it fell, and it fell, and it fell, and it fell. And when I say a boulder, I may as well say an island, for it was enormous. Unlike any boulder you or I have ever seen, it was practically the size of a mountain. It came down, 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 gathering speed as it went from the heavens themselves, and landed smack on top of the dragon, crushing one half of the dragon beneath it, squelching the life out of the other half of the dragon, and flopped on top, dead and limp, on top of that boulder, and lay there. And of course there was a gargantuan tidal wave from the crash of the boulder into the sea. And water went hither and yon, and buildings were destroyed by it, but nobody much cared, because when the flood waves retreated, they could see the dragon was dead. Their problems were over. And those people who had not already been squashed and flattened and drowned and gobbled up, they jumped for joy, they danced, they sang, they cheered. The emperor picked up the little boy Chiga and gave him a big hug, and rushed up to see the old Noro and thank her for her wisdom and her visions that saved his life. And he paid a stonemason from a nearby village to come to Mandanbashi and to carve two great stone Shisa, a female one and a male one, to sit to the left and the right of the bridge that was built from the mainland across to the great boulder and dead dragon in the harbour. And in time, on that great boulder there grew plants, mosses and lichens, and eventually flowers, and eventually trees grew up between the bones of the dead dragon. And whilst the dragon was dead, no one was ever quite sure, so they felt it was a very good idea to have the Shisa not simply as a memorial to the pendant around the emperor's neck, but to be there just in case that sneaky dragon ever decided to spring back to life and try a second attempt to gobble up the citizens of Mandanbashi. The dogs, so far as I know, are there still, and the dragon, so far as I know, is dead still.